What if I told you that once, not so very long ago, in the grand sweep of planetary time, this world hosted not one humankind, but many? What if strength was never enough? Picture yourself walking through a museum in the depths of night, when the corridors echo with whispered memories, and the display cases hold more than bones and artifacts. They hold the dreams of vanished worlds. Behind glass, the reconstructed skull of a Neanderthal stares back at you with eye sockets that once held gazes sharp enough to track prey across frozen valleys. The skull is massive, the brow ridge pronounced, the cranial capacity larger than your own. This was a being built for survival in ways that would humble us. Yet something whispers from that empty gaze. I was here. I was strong, but I am gone. Move to another case, and the femur of Homo erectus tells a different story, not of raw power, but of endurance beyond comprehension. This single bone speaks of legs that carried its owner across continents, of bodies so efficient they could walk from Africa to Indonesia, spreading across landscapes we can barely imagine. For nearly 2 million years, erectus populations thrived, adapted, conquered distance itself. Their fossils stretch from Georgia to Java, marking one of the most successful migrations in the history of life on Earth. Yet they too fell silent, leaving only scattered remnants of their extraordinary journey. In a third display, the robust bones of Homo Heidelbergensis whisper of giants who ruled the Middle Pleistocene world. Archaeological evidence from sites like Boxgrove in England reveals their hunting prowess. Horse bones bearing cut marks from perfectly crafted hand axes. Rhinoceros skulls shattered by spear thrusts that required tremendous force. These were beings who could bring down megafauna with tools and techniques that remained unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years. Their very success seemed to guarantee their permanence, yet permanence proved an illusion. And then there is us Homo sapiens, the fragile survivors. Our bones are lighter, our muscles smaller, our bodies seemingly designed for a gentler world than the one our predecessors conquered. When our species first appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago, we were latecomers to a planet already populated by these other humankinds. We shared landscapes with beings stronger than ourselves, better adapted to harsh climates, more experienced in the art of survival. By every measure of physical capability, we should have been the ones to disappear into fossil silence. Yet as you stand in that imaginary museum, surrounded by the remains of the disappeared, you are the proof of a different outcome. We are here, contemplating their absence, asking questions they may never have thought to pose. What advantage could we have possessed that muscle and cold adaptation could not provide? What invisible strength allowed the seemingly weakest to outlast giants? The answer begins to emerge when we consider not just what these bodies could do, but what the minds within them could imagine. Recent archaeological discoveries suggest that around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable happened in the caves and coastal sites of Africa. Modern humans began creating objects with no immediate survival value. Beads carved from shells, geometric patterns etched into ochre, bone tools decorated with intricate designs. These weren't just functional items, they were expressions of minds capable of thinking beyond the immediate requirements. of survival. While Neanderthals crafted elegant spear points and maintained sophisticated tool traditions, while Erectus mastered fire and long-distance migration, while Heidelbergensis perfected the hunt of massive prey. Something different was stirring in the minds of our ancestors. We were becoming the species that could see meaning in patterns, beauty in symmetry, possibility in materials that others might discard as waste. A piece of red ochre became not just pigment for body decoration, but a medium for expressing ideas that had never existed in physical form. This capacity for symbolic thought may have been our secret weapon, not the ability to make better tools or hunt more effectively, but the power to live simultaneously in the physical world and in realms of imagination. We developed languages sophisticated enough to share not just information about immediate dangers and opportunities, but stories about the past, plans for the future, concepts that existed only in the space between minds. While other human species remained anchored to the present moment, we began to inhabit multiple timescales, learning from ancestors we had never met, planning for seasons we might never see. The archaeological record reveals this transformation accelerating around the time when other human species began their mysterious decline. Sites from 40,000 years ago show explosions of creativity that seem almost alien in their sophistication. Cave paintings that rival anything produced by trained artists. Musical instruments capable of reproducing complex melodies. Trade networks stretching across continents. We weren't just surviving, we were creating culture at scales and speeds that outpaced genetic evolution. Perhaps most crucially, we developed the ability to accumulate and transmit knowledge across generations through mechanisms more flexible and rapid than biological inheritance. While other species passed down behavioral patterns through genetic programming and simple learning, we created cultural systems that could preserve innovations indefinitely, combine separate discoveries into new technologies, and adapt behavioral patterns to changing circumstances within single lifetimes. But was this intellectual revolution enough to explain our survival while stronger, more experienced species disappeared? Recent genetic studies suggest that the story may be even more complex than simple cognitive superiority. DNA extracted from Neanderthal and Denisovan fossils reveals that these species didn't simply vanish. They were partially absorbed into our genetic heritage through interbreeding. In a sense, they live on within us, their biological adaptations and accumulated knowledge incorporated into our own evolutionary trajectory. This genetic inheritance raises profound questions about the nature of survival and extinction. If we carry DNA from multiple archaic human species, if our success was built partly on their innovations and adaptations, then perhaps our victory was not the triumph of one species over others, but the emergence of something new, a hybrid lineage that combined the physical adaptations of our predecessors with cognitive capabilities that allowed for unprecedented flexibility. The fossil record suggests that this process of absorption, rather than replacement, may have been crucial to our survival. Sites in Europe show overlapping occupation by Neanderthals and modern humans for thousands of years, long enough for extensive cultural and genetic exchange. Archaeological evidence reveals modern humans adopting Neanderthal tool-making techniques, while late Neanderthal sites show innovations that may reflect influence from modern human populations rather than simple conquest. The end of other human species may have involved complex processes of integration, competition, and mutual influence. Yet questions remain that haunt the quiet spaces between scientific certainty and wonder. Why did we persist while they faded? What combination of circumstances, biological, cultural, environmental, perhaps simply fortunate, allowed our lineage to continue while theirs became memories preserved only in stone and scattered DNA? The answer may lie not in any single advantage, but in the intersection of multiple factors: cognitive flexibility, cultural innovation, environmental luck, genetic diversity, and perhaps most importantly, the development of social systems that could maintain cooperation and knowledge sharing across increasingly large and complex populations. As we drift toward sleep, surrounded by the silence of the disappeared, we might wonder what they would think of the world we have built from their foundations. We are the inheritors of their struggles, the beneficiaries of their innovations, the carriers of their genetic legacy. In our cells flows the blood of Neanderthal hunters who faced mammoths with wooden spears, of Erectus wanderers who carried fire across unknown continents, of Heidelbergensis giants who perfected the ancient arts of survival. Their strength lives on in our bodies, their knowledge preserved in our behaviors, their dreams perhaps echoing in our capacity to wonder about origins and endings. We survived not because we were stronger, but because we learned to be something different, a species capable of living as much in imagination as in immediate reality, able to preserve the past while creating futures that had never existed before. In this strange twilight, between sleeping and waking, between the known and the mysterious, we are the last humans standing, but we are also the inheritors of all who walked before us, carriers of their unfinished dreams, guardians of their forgotten voices. And yet, if this much strength could be lost, what else might we have forgotten in the long silence between their last breath and our first words? The wind across the steppes of Ice Age Europe carried a silence deeper than winter, broken only by the careful footsteps of hunters whose very bones were shaped by cold. 45,000 years ago, when glaciers carved valleys that no longer exist, and tundra stretched where cities now stand, the Neanderthals moved through landscapes that would kill us within hours. Their bodies were masterpieces of evolutionary engineering, stocky and powerful, with barrel chests that could process the thin air of high altitudes, bones so dense they could crush stone between their fingers, muscles that generated heat like internal furnaces against the endless winter. Picture one of them crouching beside a mammoth carcass in what is now southern France, the steam of fresh blood rising in air so cold it turns breath to crystal. The archaeological site of La Côte de Saint-Brelade on Jersey reveals the remains of mammoth hunting on a scale that defies imagination. Evidence of Neanderthal groups driving entire herds over cliffs, processing tons of meat with stone tools, crafted with an elegance that modern nappers struggle to reproduce. These were not desperate scavengers clinging to survival, but master hunters who had perfected techniques for bringing down creatures 10 times their size. Their tools tell stories of minds capable of planning and precision that challenges our assumptions about primitive cognition. At the Schöningen site in Germany, wooden spears dating to 400,000 years ago reveal engineering principles that wouldn't be formally understood until the development of physics. Perfectly balanced projectiles with centers of gravity calculated for maximum penetration, crafted from spruce wood selected for its specific density and grain patterns. Each spear represents hours of careful work, deep understanding of materials and aerodynamics, planning for hunts that might occur days or weeks in the future. But it was their adaptation to cold that truly set them apart from any human before or since. Neanderthal nasal cavities were enlarged and elongated, designed to warm and humidify frigid air before it reached their lungs. Their limbs were shortened to conserve heat, their torsos enlarged to house the massive lung capacity required for high altitude and cold weather survival. Genetic analysis of Neanderthal DNA reveals adaptations for cold tolerance that we lack, mutations affecting skin pigmentation, hair thickness, metabolic efficiency in low-temperature environments. In the caves of Atapuerca in Spain, Neanderthal fossil remains dating to 430,000 years ago show evidence of sophisticated social behaviors that challenge stereotypes about brutish primitiveness. Dental analysis reveals they cared for injured and elderly members of their groups, sharing food with individuals who could no longer contribute to hunting or gathering. Stone tool caches suggest they planned for future needs, creating supply depots that could be accessed during seasonal migrations. Fire hearths arranged in careful patterns speak of social organization, designated sleeping areas, communal cooking spaces. Their use of fire transcended mere survival necessity and approached art. Archaeological evidence from sites like Qesem cave in Israel shows Neanderthals controlling fire for over 400,000 years, developing techniques for maintaining hearths that could burn for months, creating specialized fireplaces for different purposes: cooking, tool making, warmth, social gathering. They learned to select specific types of wood for different functions, to bank coals for preservation overnight, to create smoke patterns that could communicate across long distances. Most remarkably, recent discoveries suggest Neanderthals possessed symbolic capabilities previously thought unique to modern humans. In Spanish caves, ochre paintings and shell jewelry dating to 65,000 years ago, long before modern humans reached Europe, reveal minds capable of creating meaning beyond immediate function. These weren't crude scratchings or accidental markings, but deliberate artistic expressions, hand stencils blown onto cave walls, geometric patterns that seem to encode abstract concepts, perforated shells modified for use as personal ornaments. Yet, for all their sophistication, for all their perfect adaptation to Ice Age Europe, something went wrong. The last Neanderthal sites, dating to around 28,000 years ago, tell a story of gradual decline that archaeologists are still struggling to understand. At Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, one of their final refuges. The archaeological layers reveal a slow simplification of tool technologies, a reduction in site complexity, evidence of populations under increasing stress. Climate may have been their undoing, but not in the way we might expect. Neanderthals survived multiple ice ages, thrived during some of the harshest climatic conditions in human history, adapted to environments that would challenge any human population. But as the climate began warming around 40,000 years ago, as forests replaced tundra and new prey species migrated into their territories, their very specialization may have become a limitation. The megafauna they had perfected techniques for hunting, woolly rhinoceros, cave bears, giant deer, began disappearing as ecosystems shifted. Forest environments favored different hunting strategies, required different tool technologies, supported different social organizations. Neanderthals, so perfectly adapted to the world that had shaped them, may have found themselves unable to transform rapidly enough to match the pace of environmental change. Isotope analysis of late Neanderthal remains reveals increasing dietary stress, evidence of populations turning to less preferred food sources, signs of nutritional deficiency that suggest they were struggling to adapt their subsistence strategies to changing conditions. At sites like El Sidrón in Spain, chemical analysis of tooth enamel from some of the last Neanderthals shows they were consuming plant foods they had previously avoided, perhaps indicating desperation as familiar prey became scarce. But environmental pressure alone cannot explain their disappearance, especially when we consider that modern humans were simultaneously expanding into the same territories, apparently thriving in the same challenging conditions that were overwhelming Neanderthal populations. Recent genetic studies suggest that population size may have been a crucial factor. Neanderthal groups appear to have remained small and relatively isolated, lacking the large-scale social networks that allowed modern humans to share innovations, coordinate responses to challenges, and maintain genetic diversity across vast territories. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal populations never developed the extensive trade networks that characterized early modern human societies. While modern human sites from 40,000 years ago show materials transported hundreds of miles, shells from distant coasts, stone tools made from exotic materials, decorative objects that could only have been obtained through complex exchange systems, Neanderthal sites typically contain only local materials, suggesting more limited social networks and reduced capacity for long-distance cooperation. This isolation may have created a cascade of disadvantages. Smaller populations are more vulnerable to random demographic events, disease outbreaks, resource failures, climatic disasters that might be survived by larger, more connected groups. Limited gene flow between populations can lead to reduced genetic diversity and increased vulnerability to environmental stresses. Most critically, small isolated groups have limited capacity for cultural innovation and knowledge preservation. Recent computer models of Neanderthal population dynamics suggest they may have been caught in a demographic trap. As modern human populations expanded into Europe, competition for resources may have pushed Neanderthal groups into increasingly marginal environments. Smaller, more isolated populations would have been less able to maintain the cultural knowledge necessary for complex technologies and sophisticated hunting techniques. Loss of traditional knowledge would have reduced their competitive advantage, leading to further population decline in a downward spiral that eventually led to extinction. Yet even as we reconstruct their disappearance, we must remember that they did not entirely vanish. Genetic analysis reveals that most non-African human populations carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, evidence of interbreeding that occurred during the thousands of years when our species coexisted in Europe and Western Asia. Some of these inherited genetic variants appear to have been beneficial, providing advantages for immune function, cold tolerance, and high altitude adaptation that persist in modern populations. The extinction of the Neanderthals represents one of the great mysteries of human evolution, the disappearance of a successful species that had survived for over 400,000 years, mastered one of the harshest environments on Earth, developed sophisticated technologies and social systems, and even possessed symbolic capabilities that we are only beginning to appreciate. Their silence today forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of survival, the role of chance in evolutionary success, and the fragility of even the most perfectly adapted populations when faced with rapid environmental and competitive pressures. In caves across Europe, their hearths still contain charcoal from fires they lit tens of thousands of years ago. Their tools remain sharp enough to cut, their art still vivid enough to move us to wonder. They were masters of cold and stone, perfectly suited to worlds that no longer exist, yet somehow their very perfection became a limitation when those worlds began to change. Their story reminds us that strength alone was never enough, that survival requires not just adaptation to present conditions, but flexibility to face futures that cannot be predicted or prepared for, except through the development of systems that can respond to change itself rather than just to specific challenges. Before there were maps or compasses, before the concepts of distance or horizon had names, there were footsteps. For nearly 2 million years, longer than any other human species has managed to endure, Homo erectus walked. They walked out of Africa when the Sahara was green, across landscapes that shifted like dreams between ice and warmth, through continents that bore no resemblance to the world we know. Their bones lie scattered from Georgia to Java, marking what may be the greatest migration in the history of consciousness. Not just a journey across space, but across time so vast it defies comprehension. Imagine standing in the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where the first Erectus fossils were discovered, and trying to grasp the scope of their journey. Here, nearly 2 million years ago, walked beings whose legs were already built for distances we can barely conceive. The famous Turkana boy skeleton, preserved in the sediments of Kenya, reveals a body designed not for strength alone, but for efficiency, long limbs that could cover ground with minimal energy expenditure, a pelvis perfectly adapted for bipedal locomotion across varied terrain, bones that spoke of creatures born to wander, but they carried more than bodies built for a Walking, they carried fire, perhaps the first portable technology that could transform any landscape into a livable space. Archaeological sites from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa show controlled use of fire by Erectus populations as early as 1.8 million years ago. Evidence of mines capable of maintaining one of nature's most dangerous and useful forces. Unlike lightning-struck blazes or volcanic flows, their fires were deliberate, sustained, transported across impossible distances to illuminate caves in Georgia, cooking hearths in China, tool-making sites in Indonesia. The Dmanisi site in Georgia tells the story of some of their first steps beyond Africa, and it's a story more complex than simple conquest. Here, 1.8 million years ago, Erectus populations were already showing the adaptability that would define their species. Fossil evidence reveals individuals with different skull sizes and brain capacities living in the same groups, suggesting a diversity of cognitive abilities within single populations. Some individuals show evidence of serious injuries that had healed, indicating they cared for group members who could no longer contribute to survival, that their societies possessed mechanisms for supporting the vulnerable. Their tools evolved slowly, but with a persistence that speaks to minds capable of gradual refinement across thousands of generations. The Aquilian hand-axe tradition, which Erectus developed and maintained for over 1 million years, represents one of the most successful technologies in human history. These weren't crude choppers, but carefully crafted implements that required sophisticated understanding of stone fracture patterns, edge geometry, and ergonomic design. Archaeological experiments show that creating a well-made hand axe requires hours of focused work and years of training to master. Yet it's the very conservatism of their technology that hints at both their success and their eventual limitations. While the Erectus populations spread across 3 continents, while they adapted to environments ranging from tropical forests to temperate grasslands, while they survived ice ages and volcanic winters, their basic toolkit remained remarkably unchanged for over 1 million years. This represents either extraordinary success, technologies so perfectly adapted they required no improvement, or a form of cognitive inflexibility that may have ultimately contributed to their decline. The Java sites reveal Erectus populations that had traveled further from their African origins than any humans before or since, crossing water barriers that shouldn't have been navigable with their available technology. The presence of Erectus fossils on islands like Java suggests they possessed some form of watercraft, or at minimum, the cognitive ability to plan crossings of bodies of water whose far shores were invisible from their starting points. This implies minds capable of abstract thinking about unseen destinations, planning for journeys into truly unknown territories. In China, Erectus populations adapted to environments radically different from their African origins, developing techniques for survival in temperate climates that would have challenged any human population. The Zhoukoudian cave system near Beijing preserves evidence of Erectus occupation spanning hundreds of thousands of years, revealing populations that maintained cultural continuity across timescales longer than our entire recorded history. Layer upon layer of ash deposits show they maintained fires continuously for generations, creating warming systems for caves that housed dozens of individuals through harsh winters. But perhaps their most remarkable achievement was simply persistence. While other species appeared and disappeared, while climates oscillated between ice and warmth, while continents drifted and mountain ranges rose, Erectus populations endured. Fossil sites spanning their entire range show evidence of gradual changes: larger brain sizes in later populations, more sophisticated tool use, evidence of increasingly complex social behaviors, but always within the framework of the basics Erectus pattern established nearly 2 million years earlier. Recent discoveries in Indonesia suggest that some Erectus populations may have survived far longer than previously believed, possibly persisting until as recently as 100,000 years ago. The Flores material, though controversial, raises the possibility that isolated Erectus populations continued evolving in geographic isolation, perhaps developing unique adaptations to island environments. If confirmed, this would mean that Erectus overlapped in time not only with early modern humans, but potentially with Neanderthals and other archaic human species. Their disappearance, when it finally came, seems to have been gradual rather than catastrophic. Unlike the relatively rapid extinction of Neanderthals, Erectus populations appear to have declined slowly across their entire range, leaving few dramatic last stands or final refugia. The latest Erectus sites show no obvious signs of environmental crisis or competitive pressure, just a gradual thinning of the archaeological record that eventually fades to silence. Various theories attempt to explain their eventual extinction. Some researchers propose they were outcompeted by more advanced human species: early Neanderthals in Western Asia, archaic sapiens in Africa, Heidelbergensis populations in Europe. Others suggest that their very success led to evolutionary stagnation, that populations so well adapted to specific environments lost the flexibility necessary to respond to changing conditions. Climate change may have played a role, but not in the direct way that affected later human species. Erectus had already survived multiple ice ages, major volcanic events, and significant environmental shifts. Instead, the gradual warming and environmental changes of the Middle Pleistocene may have favored human populations with more sophisticated technologies and social organizations, gradually reducing the competitive advantages that had sustained Erectus for so long. Isotope analysis of late Erectus remains suggests they were facing increasing dietary challenges, possibly related to changes in prey availability or plant resources. Chemical signatures in tooth enamel from some of the latest Erectus sites show evidence of stress markers, suggesting populations under pressure from environmental or social factors we can only speculate about. Perhaps most intriguingly, genetic studies hint that Erectus populations may not have entirely disappeared, but rather were absorbed through interbreeding with other human lineages. While we lack ancient DNA from Erectus fossils due to their age and tropical preservation environments, some researchers suggest that modern human populations in Southeast Asia may carry genetic signatures of archaic populations that could represent Erectus ancestry. The legacy of Erectus extends far beyond their genetic contributions. They were the first humans to master long-distance migration, to adapt human biology and behavior to radically different environments, to maintain cultural traditions across timescales that dwarf recorded history. Their success in colonizing Asia laid the groundwork for all subsequent human expansion, establishing population networks and cultural adaptations that would influence human evolution for millions of years. Most remarkably, they accomplished all of this with brain sizes significantly smaller than modern humans, with technologies that remained essentially unchanged for over 1 million years. With social organizations that appear to have been relatively simple compared to later human species, their success suggests that raw intelligence and technological sophistication may be less important for evolutionary success than we typically assume. That persistence, adaptability within limits, and the ability to maintain successful strategies across vast timescales may be more crucial survival traits as we contemplate their extraordinary journey from African origins to Asian endpoints. We're reminded that they walked farther and longer than any humans before or since. They were the long walkers, the wanderers, the first to prove that human feet could carry consciousness to the ends of the earth. Their nearly 2 million-year reign lasted longer than our entire species has existed, yet even their remarkable endurance could not protect them from the slow entropy of evolutionary change that eventually claimed their populations across 3 continents. Were they undone not by weakness, but by the gradual accumulation of small disadvantages, the slow erosion of competitive edges they had maintained for millennia? Their silence today reminds us that even the most successful adaptations are temporary, that survival is always a race between change and the ability to respond to change, and that in the long arc of evolutionary time, even giants eventually stumble and fall. In the river valleys of Middle Pleistocene Europe, where ancient streams carved channels that time has filled with secrets, giants once walked whose very presence must have changed the landscape around them. Homo Heidelbergensis stood taller than most humans today, their shoulders broader than door frames, their arms capable of hurling spears with such force that mammoth bones still bear the scars of their hunts 500,000 years later. They were the bridge builders between the ancient world of Erectus and the modern realm of sapiens, possessing bodies that seemed designed by some cosmic engineer for the perfect pursuit of massive prey. Archaeological evidence from Boxgrove in England paints a picture of hunting prowess that defies imagination. Here, 500,000 years ago, Heidelbergensis hunters brought down horses, rhinoceros, and giant deer with wooden spears tipped with carefully crafted stone points. The bone assemblages show not opportunistic scavenging, but systematic hunting and butchering of large animals, with cut marks that reveal intimate knowledge of anatomy and efficient processing techniques. These were not desperate survivors struggling for sustenance, but master predators who had turned the pursuit of megafauna into a sophisticated art. Their tools spoke of minds capable of planning and precision that would impress modern engineers. At Schöningen in Germany, the famous wooden spears, dating to 400,000 years ago, represent some of the most sophisticated wooden implements ever discovered in the archaeological record. Each spear was carved from carefully selected spruce wood, with the center of gravity positioned for optimal flight characteristics, tips hardened by fire, and balance points calculated for maximum penetration. Creating such weapons required not only technical skill, but deep understanding of physics principles that wouldn't be formally described for hundreds of thousands of years. The fossil evidence reveals bodies built for power on a scale that seems almost superhuman. The Cima de los Huesos site in Spain has yielded the most complete collection of Heidelbergensis remains ever discovered, and the picture that emerges is of humans whose physical capabilities far exceeded our own. Males averaged over 6 feet in height at a time when such stature would have been truly gigantic. Their muscle attachment points show evidence of extraordinary strength. Their bone density suggests bodies capable of generating and withstanding forces that would injure modern humans. But it wasn't just raw strength that set them apart. It was the application of that strength through sophisticated hunting technologies and social cooperation. Evidence from Terra Amata in France shows Heidelbergensis groups constructing temporary shelters with careful attention to wind patterns and drainage, creating living spaces that could house large hunting parties for extended periods. Post holes arranged in oval patterns suggest structures over 20 feet long, implying social groups larger and more organizationally complex than those of earlier human species. Their mastery of fire transcended simple survival needs and approached industrial sophistication. At Beech's Pit in England, Heidelbergensis fire sites show evidence of controlled burning, used not just for warmth and cooking, but for tool manufacture, habitat management, and possibly even primitive metallurgy. Burned flint tools show heat treatment patterns that suggest they understood how thermal cycling could improve stone tool performance, a technique that wouldn't be widely used by other human species for hundreds of thousands of years. Recent analysis of Heidelbergensis sites reveals evidence of symbolic behavior that challenges assumptions about the evolution of human consciousness. At Bilsingsleben in Germany, elephant bones bearing deliberate incision patterns suggest early forms of artistic expression or symbolic marking. While not as sophisticated as later cave art, these markings represent some of the earliest evidence of humans creating patterns with no obvious functional purpose, hints of minds beginning to operate in realms of meaning rather than pure utility. Their hunting strategies required not only individual skill, but coordinated group effort on scales that implied sophisticated communication abilities. The Clacton site in England preserves evidence of mass hunting events where multiple Heidelbergensis groups apparently cooperated to drive herds of large animals into marshy areas where they could be systematically killed and processed. Such operations would have required planning, coordination, and communication systems approaching the complexity of those used by modern hunter-gatherer societies. Yet for all their apparent advantages, superior size, strength, sophisticated hunting technologies, evidence of symbolic thinking, Heidelbergensis populations began declining around 300,000 years ago, eventually disappearing from the fossil record by 200,000 years ago. Their extinction represents one of the great puzzles of human evolution. Why would a species so perfectly adapted to Middle Pleistocene hunting lifestyles, fail to persist when seemingly less capable populations manage to survive. Climate change during the late Middle Pleistocene may have played a crucial role, but not in the direct way we might expect. Heidelbergensis had already survived multiple glacial cycles, adapting successfully to environments ranging from Mediterranean woodlands to northern European tundra. Instead, the gradual environmental changes of their final period may have undermined the very advantages that had made them successful. As prey animals evolved and changed, as environmental conditions shifted, the massive body size that had been Heidelbergensis's greatest advantage may have become a liability. Large bodies require more food, generate greater heat stress in warm climates, and are less energy efficient during periods of resource scarcity. The very strength that allowed them to hunt megafauna may have made them vulnerable when those prey species began declining due to environmental pressures. Isotope analysis of late Heidelbergensis remains suggests they were facing increasing dietary challenges during their final millennia. Chemical signatures in tooth enamel show evidence of dietary stress, suggesting populations struggling to maintain the high-calorie intake necessary to support their large body size. At some sites, bone chemistry reveals increased consumption of plant foods, possibly indicating they were being forced to supplement their preferred meat-heavy diet. As hunting success declined, competition from emerging human species may have provided the final pressure that pushed Heidelbergensis populations toward extinction. Early Neanderthals, emerging from Heidelbergensis populations in Europe, possessed many of the same hunting capabilities, but with more efficient body proportions and potentially superior cold weather adaptations. In Africa, early sapiens populations were developing technological innovations and social systems that may have given them competitive advantages in resource acquisition and territory control. The transition from Heidelbergensis to later human species appears to have been gradual rather than sudden, suggesting complex processes of evolution and possibly interbreeding rather than simple replacement. Fossil evidence from sites like Arago in France shows Heidelbergensis populations developing increasingly modern characteristics over time, while early Neanderthal and sapiens fossils retain some Heidelbergensis features, suggesting these weren't discrete species, but rather points on a continuum of human evolution. Recent genetic studies, while unable to extract DNA from Heidelbergensis fossils due to their age, suggest that these populations may have contributed to the ancestry of multiple later human lineages. Computer models of human evolution propose that Heidelbergensis served as a common ancestor for both Neanderthal and sapiens lineages, with populations in different geographic regions, evolving toward different evolutionary endpoints while maintaining genetic contact through migration and interbreeding. The legacy of Heidelbergensis extends far beyond their direct genetic contributions. They perfected hunting techniques that would be adopted and refined by all subsequent human populations. Their innovations in stone tool technology, fire use, and shelter construction provided the foundations for later technological developments. Most importantly, they demonstrated that human intelligence could be successfully applied to the systematic exploitation of large mammals, proving that cooperative hunting could support population sizes and social complexities previously impossible. Their story reminds us that evolutionary success and long-term survival are not always correlated. Heidelbergensis populations were extraordinarily successful for their time, dominating Middle Pleistocene ecosystems and developing technologies and social systems that allowed them to thrive for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet, their very specialization for specific types of prey and particular environmental conditions may have made them vulnerable when those conditions began to change. As we imagine these giants moving through ancient landscapes, their spears balanced, in hands strong enough to drive stone points through rhinoceros hide, we're reminded that physical prowess alone has never been sufficient for evolutionary success. They were masters of their world, perfectly adapted to the specific challenges of Middle Pleistocene hunting lifestyles. Yet somehow their perfection became a limitation when the world began changing in ways they couldn't predict or control. Their disappearance marks not failure, but the completion of a successful evolutionary experiment that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. They were the giants of the hunt, rulers of riverlands and forest margins, bridge builders between the ancient past and the modern world. Did their very robustness limit their ability to adapt when climates shifted and prey species changed, when success required not just strength, but flexibility, not just power, but the ability to imagine different ways of being human in a world that was itself becoming something new? 300,000 years ago, in the sun-scorched landscapes of what we now call Morocco, a new kind of human drew breath for the first time. Compared to their contemporaries, the robust Heidelbergensis with their massive frames, the cold, adapted Neanderthals with their barrel chests and powerful limbs. These newcomers seemed almost fragile. Their bones were lighter, their muscles less pronounced, their bodies apparently designed for a gentler world than the one that had shaped their predecessors. They were us, Homo sapiens, and by every measure of immediate survival capability, we should have been the first to disappear into the fossil silence that eventually claimed all the others. The Jebel Irhoud site in Morocco, where some of our earliest ancestors were discovered, tells a story that challenges our assumptions about human success. These early sapiens had brains approaching modern size, but their skulls were elongated, their faces more projecting than our own. They made sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, and hunted large mammals. Yet archaeologically, they appeared no more advanced than their Neanderthal or Heidelbergensis contemporaries. What invisible advantage could they have possessed that strength and specialization could not provide? The answer may lie not in what their bodies could do, but in what their minds could imagine. Around 70,000 years ago, something remarkable begins to appear in African archaeological sites. The first clear evidence of symbolic behavior, of humans creating objects whose value lay not in their practical function, but in their meaning. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, ochre plaques bear geometric engravings that seem to represent abstract concepts, patterns that exist nowhere in nature, but only in the space of human imagination. These weren't crude scratchings or accidental markings, but deliberate artistic expressions that required planning patience, and the ability to conceive of symbols that could carry meaning across time and space. Shell beads from the same period show evidence of long-distance trade networks, suggesting that early sapiens populations were not only creating symbolic objects, but sharing concepts about their significance across vast geographic regions. While Neanderthals in their northern valleys were perfecting Ice Age hunting techniques, and Heidelbergensis were bringing down megafauna with wooden spears, something different was stirring in the minds of our African ancestors. We were becoming the species that could see patterns where none existed, create beauty for its own sake, communicate not just about immediate dangers and opportunities, but about ideas, dreams, and possibilities that existed only in the realm of thought. The development of sophisticated language may have been our crucial innovation, though one that leaves few direct traces in the archaeological record. Recent genetic studies suggest that around 50,000 years ago, modern humans underwent some form of cognitive revolution, possibly involving mutations affecting neural development, language capacity, or abstract reasoning abilities. This timing coincides precisely with the period when sapiens populations began expanding out of Africa and rapidly colonizing the rest of the world. Archaeological sites from this expansion period reveal explosions of cultural innovation that seem to happen too quickly for purely genetic evolution. Within a few thousand years, modern human populations developed new hunting technologies, sophisticated artistic traditions, complex social organizations, and trade networks spanning continents. This suggests that cultural evolution, the accumulation and transmission of learned knowledge, had become more important for human survival than biological adaptation. The speed of our global expansion was unprecedented in human evolution. While Erectus had taken nearly 2 million years to spread from Africa to Southeast Asia, modern humans colonized the entire planet in less than 50,000 years. We reached Australia by 50,000 years ago, requiring sophisticated watercraft and navigation skills. We penetrated the Arctic by 40,000 years ago, developing technologies for survival in environments more extreme than those faced by cold-adapted Neanderthals. But our rapid expansion came with costs that reveal both our advantages and our vulnerabilities. Genetic studies show that modern human populations outside Africa carry signatures of severe population bottlenecks during their initial migrations, suggesting that our early expansions involved small founder groups that faced enormous challenges in establishing viable populations in new environments. Unlike other human species that evolved slowly within specific geographic regions, we were repeatedly testing our adaptability against completely novel challenges. Our survival strategy was fundamentally different from that of our predecessors. Instead of developing biological specializations for specific environments, we created cultural systems that could preserve and transmit adaptive knowledge across generations. We became the species that could live in multiple environments simultaneously, not through genetic adaptation, but through the development of technologies, social organizations, and knowledge systems that could be rapidly modified to meet new challenges. The archaeological record reveals this flexibility in action. Early modern human sites show rapid adoption and modification of new technologies, suggesting populations capable of learning from each other and improving upon inherited knowledge within single lifetimes, while Neanderthal tool traditions remained essentially unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Modern human technologies show constant innovation and regional variation, indicating societies where knowledge was actively shared, modified, and improved. Perhaps most importantly, we developed the ability to cooperate in large, complex social networks that could support collective problem solving on unprecedented scales. Archaeological evidence from 40,000 years ago shows trade networks stretching across continents, art styles shared across vast regions, and coordination of resource extraction and processing that required cooperation between multiple groups. We became the species that could solve problems not just through individual intelligence, but through collective knowledge systems that accumulated insights across generations. Our cognitive advantages may have been subtle, but crucial. Recent archaeological studies suggest that while Neanderthals and other archaic humans were capable of sophisticated planning and problem solving, modern humans developed superior abilities in abstract reasoning, analogical thinking, and the manipulation of symbolic concepts. We became uniquely capable of seeing connections between disparate phenomena, of applying solutions developed for one problem to completely different challenges. This cognitive flexibility proved crucial during the environmental challenges of the late Pleistocene, as climate oscillated between ice and warmth, as sea levels rose and fell, as familiar ecosystems disappeared and new ones emerged. Modern human populations proved capable of rapid behavioral and technological adaptation. We developed new hunting strategies, new food processing techniques, new social organizations in response to changing conditions, often within single lifetimes rather than across evolutionary timescales. But our success wasn't inevitable or guaranteed. Genetic evidence reveals that modern human populations came close to extinction multiple times during their early expansion phases. The Toba volcanic eruption 74,000 years ago may have reduced global human populations to as few as 10,000 individuals, creating a genetic bottleneck whose effects are still visible in modern populations. Our survival through such crises may have depended as much on luck as on any inherent advantages. The encounter between modern humans and other human species represents one of the most complex chapters in our evolutionary story. Recent genetic studies reveal that we didn't simply replace Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic populations, but rather absorbed them through limited interbreeding. Most non-African human populations carry 1 to 4% archaic DNA, suggesting that our success involved not just competition, but also integration of genetic and cultural innovations developed by other human lineages. This genetic inheritance may have been crucial to our survival in new environments. Neanderthal genes appear to have provided advantages for immune function and cold tolerance that helped modern human populations adapt to European and Asian environments. Denisovan genes may have contributed high-altitude adaptations that allowed colonization of the Tibetan Plateau. In essence, we survived partly by incorporating the evolutionary innovations of the species we were replacing. Our fragility proved to be a strength because it forced us to develop cultural solutions to biological limitations. Unable to survive harsh climates through pure physiology, we created clothing, shelter, and heating technologies. Unable to compete physically with large prey animals, we developed sophisticated weapons and cooperative hunting strategies. Unable to process many plant foods with our weak digestive systems, we learned to use fire and fermentation to make inedible materials nutritious. Most remarkably, we became the species capable of living as much in imagination as in immediate reality. We developed the ability to plan for futures we might never see, to learn from ancestors we had never met, to cooperate with strangers based on shared symbols and stories. We created meaning systems that could motivate cooperation across vast social networks, belief systems that could coordinate behavior across generations, knowledge systems that could preserve and transmit crucial information even when populations were scattered or reduced. As we contemplate our unlikely survival while stronger species disappeared, we're reminded that evolutionary success often belongs not to the most powerful, but to the most adaptable. We were the fragile survivors, succeeding not through superior strength or environmental specialization, but through the development of cultural systems that could preserve knowledge, promote cooperation, and enable rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Our weakness became our strength. Our inability to dominate environments through pure biology forced us to develop technologies of meaning that proved more powerful than muscle, more enduring than bone, more flexible than any genetic adaptation that had come before. In the depths of caves that have held human secrets for tens of thousands of years, where shadows dance on walls painted by hands that knew both hunger and wonder, we can still feel the warmth of ancient fires, not the wild flames that consume forests or the lightning that splits trees, but the carefully tended hearths around which our ancestors gathered to share more than warmth. These fires became the crucibles of something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth: the transformation of scattered information into shared knowledge, of individual survival into collective dreaming, of mere existence into meaning. Fire had been humanity's companion for nearly 2 million years. By the time modern humans began their great expansion, Homo erectus carried it across continents. Neanderthals perfected its use for hunting and warmth. Heidelbergensis employed it for sophisticated tool-making. But around 50,000 years ago, in the firelight of African caves and European shelters, something new began to flicker alongside those ancient flames. Our ancestors discovered that fire could illuminate not just the darkness around them, but the darkness within, the vast spaces of imagination where stories lived, where memory could be transformed into wisdom, where individual experience could become collective knowledge. Archaeological sites from this period reveal hearths that served purposes beyond mere survival necessity. At sites like Clay's River in South Africa and Kafse Cave in Israel, fire features show careful arrangement and maintenance patterns that suggest they functioned as social centers, gathering places where groups could assemble for activities that transcended immediate survival needs. The distribution of artifacts around these hearths tells stories of communities engaged in activities requiring extended periods of coordinated attention, tool-making sessions that involved teaching and learning, food preparation that followed, complex cultural protocols, social interactions that built and maintained group cohesion. But it was a language that transformed these gathering places from simple survival necessities into something approaching the sacred, while other human species almost certainly possessed sophisticated communication systems, calls, gestures, and simple vocalizations adequate for coordinating hunts and sharing basic information. The archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans developed something qualitatively different: the ability to create and manipulate symbols that could represent not just immediate realities, but abstract concepts, imagined possibilities, and temporal relationships spanning past, present, and future. The emergence of fully modern language left no fossils, no stone tools, no direct archaeological traces, yet its effects are visible everywhere in the human record from 50,000 years ago onward. Suddenly, artifact styles begin showing rapid innovation and regional variation that suggests information sharing and cultural transmission at unprecedented rates. Trade networks appear that span continents, implying communication systems capable of maintaining relationships across vast distances and complex social hierarchies. Most tellingly, art emerges, not just functional decoration, but symbolic expression that could only exist in minds capable of representing abstract concepts and shared meanings. The cave paintings of Europe, created between 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, represent the flowering of this linguistic revolution. At Lascaux, Chauvet, and hundreds of other sites, modern humans created art of breathtaking sophistication that rivals anything produced by trained contemporary artists. But these weren't simply beautiful decorations. They were communications, systems, repositories of knowledge, and expressions of shared cultural concepts that could be understood by individuals who had never met their creators. Recent archaeological analysis reveals that cave art sites were often located at significant distances from habitation areas, suggesting they served specialized functions that required deliberate journeys to access. The paintings themselves show evidence of careful planning and execution, with artists working by lamplight in difficult conditions to create images that would endure for millennia. This implies cultural systems that valued the preservation and transmission of information beyond the immediate needs of survival. Societies that had developed concepts of permanence, legacy, and communication across time. The sophistication of these artistic traditions suggests that language had evolved far beyond simple communication of immediate needs. The ability to create representational art requires not just technical skill, but conceptual frameworks for abstraction, symbolic representation, and shared meaning systems. Cave paintings show evidence of narrative sequences, seasonal calendars, astronomical observations, and complex symbolic systems that could only have emerged from minds capable of sophisticated abstract reasoning and extended cultural transmission. Music appears in the archaeological record at roughly the same time as visual art, with bone flutes and other instruments dating to 40,000 years ago or earlier. These instruments show evidence of sophisticated acoustic engineering, with carefully calculated hole placement for specific tonal patterns and evidence of repair and maintenance, suggesting they were valued cultural objects. The emergence of music implies not just individual artistic expression, but shared aesthetic systems that could coordinate group behavior and emotional states through auditory symbols. The development of jewelry and personal ornamentation reveals another dimension of the symbolic revolution. Beads, pendants, and decorative objects from this period show evidence of standardized production techniques and widespread trade in materials, suggesting that personal identity had become something that could be constructed and communicated through material symbols. These objects often show wear patterns, indicating they were treasured possessions, passed down across generations or transported across vast distances, implying cultural systems that could invest objects with meanings that transcended their material properties. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this cultural explosion was its speed and geographic scope. Within a few thousand years, modern human populations across Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia were producing similar types of symbolic objects and artistic expressions, despite being separated by vast distances and having no direct communication. This suggests that the cognitive capabilities underlying symbolic behavior had become fixed in modern human populations, that we had evolved into a species capable of creating meaning systems wherever we established viable populations. The social implications of this symbolic revolution were profound. Language and art enabled the development of complex belief systems that could coordinate behavior across large groups and extended time periods. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasing complexity in burial practices, suggesting that modern humans had developed concepts of identity that extended beyond individual lifetimes, that they were beginning to live in conceptual frameworks that included relationships with ancestors, descendants, and abstract social roles. Trade networks from this period reveal social systems of unprecedented complexity. Materials like amber, shells, and high-quality stone tools appear hundreds of miles from their sources, indicating exchange relationships that required sophisticated social protocols and trust systems. These networks couldn't have functioned without communication systems capable of negotiating complex agreements, maintaining relationships across time and distance, and coordinating activities between groups that might rarely meet face to face. The implications for competition with other human species were devastating. While Neanderthals maintained sophisticated but relatively static cultural traditions, modern humans were developing cultural systems capable of rapid innovation and adaptation. Archaeological sites show modern human technologies changing and improving within single occupation layers, suggesting populations capable of collective problem solving and knowledge accumulation at speeds that outpaced genetic evolution. Perhaps most crucially, language and symbolic thinking enabled modern humans to live simultaneously in multiple temporal frameworks. While other species remained largely anchored to immediate experience, modern humans could plan for seasonal cycles, preserve knowledge across generations, and coordinate activities based on abstract concepts of future possibilities. This temporal flexibility proved crucial during the environmental challenges of the late Pleistocene, allowing populations to prepare for predicted changes and adapt rapidly to unexpected ones. The psychological effects of symbolic culture may have been as important as the practical advantages. Language enabled modern humans to share not just information, but emotional experiences and conceptual frameworks that could provide meaning and purpose beyond immediate survival needs. The emergence of art, music, and storytelling suggests populations that had developed methods for managing stress, building social cohesion, and maintaining motivation during difficult periods through shared cultural experiences. Recent archaeological studies suggest that the symbolic revolution also enabled new forms of collective memory that could preserve and transmit crucial survival information across multiple generations. Stories, songs, and artistic traditions could encode practical knowledge about resources, dangers, and opportunities in forms that were memorable, enjoyable, and resistant to the kinds of information loss that affect purely factual transmission. Cultural systems became repositories of survival knowledge that could persist even when populations were reduced or scattered. The transformation was irreversible once it began. Populations that had developed sophisticated symbolic cultures could not easily revert to simpler communication systems, both because the cultural knowledge they had accumulated was too valuable to abandon, and because their social organizations had become dependent on symbolic coordination mechanisms. Modern humans had crossed a threshold into forms of consciousness that required cultural support systems to maintain, making us forever dependent on the shared dreams and collective meanings that had emerged from those ancient fires. As we gather around our own fires, whether literal hearths or the metaphorical warmth of shared stories, whether in physical communities or digital networks that span the globe, we continue the tradition that began in those painted caves. We remain the species that lives as much in imagination as in immediate reality, that finds meaning in symbols and beauty in patterns, that can coordinate vast social networks through shared concepts and collective dreams. The fires still burn, the languages still evolve, the shared dreams still shape our reality, connecting us across time to those ancient voices that first learned to transform firelight into wisdom, survival into culture, existence into art. Could it be that strength of imagination outlasted the strength of bone and muscle? That the fragile flames of shared meaning proved more enduring than any physical adaptation, more powerful than any force nature had unleashed before? The earth breathes slowly, inhaling ice ages that last for millennia, exhaling warm periods that transform continents from tundra to forest to desert and back again. For the last 2 million years, this planetary respiration has driven cycles of change so vast they reshape not just landscapes, but the evolutionary trajectories of every species that attempts to call this restless world home. The human story has unfolded against this backdrop of constant transformation, where survival depended not just on the ability to adapt to existing conditions, but on the capacity to remain flexible when familiar worlds disappeared and new ones emerged in their place, imagine standing on the edge of an ice sheet 200,000 years ago, where glaciers a mile thick ground continents into new shapes and locked so much water in frozen form that sea levels dropped by 400 feet. Land bridges emerged, where now there are only oceans, connections between continents that allowed species to walk where their descendants would need boats to travel. The Mediterranean became a series of hypersaline lakes. Britain was connected to continental Europe by vast, frozen plains, and Australia stretched much closer to Southeast Asia across exposed continental shelves. These weren't gradual changes that species could adapt to over evolutionary timescales, but relatively rapid shifts that occurred within the lifespans of individual organisms. Paleoclimatic records from ice cores and marine sediments reveal that major climate transitions often happened within decades or centuries, faster than genetic evolution could respond, demanding behavioral and cultural adaptations that could be implemented within single generations. For specialized human species, these rapid shifts posed existential challenges. Neanderthal populations, so perfectly adapted to the cold steppes and tundra of Ice Age Europe, found their world transforming as temperatures rose and forests began replacing the open landscapes that had shaped their hunting strategies. Archaeological evidence from their final refugia in southern Spain and Gibraltar shows populations struggling with changing prey availability as mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and reindeer gave way to smaller forest animals that required different hunting techniques and social organizations. Isotope analysis of late Neanderthal remains reveals increasing dietary stress during periods of rapid climate change. Chemical signatures in tooth enamel from sites like El Cedron in Spain show individuals consuming larger proportions of plant foods than their ancestors, possibly indicating that traditional meat-heavy diets were becoming difficult to maintain as familiar prey species migrated to new regions or disappeared entirely. Bone chemistry also shows evidence of seasonal malnutrition, suggesting populations that were struggling to maintain adequate caloric intake throughout annual cycles. The specialized megafauna that had sustained Heidelbergensis hunting traditions faced similar pressures. As global temperatures fluctuated and ecosystems shifted, the large mammals that had been reliable prey for hundreds of thousands of years began experiencing population crashes and range restrictions. The straight-tusked elephant, giant deer, and cave bear that had provided the bulk of calories for Heidelbergensis populations were among the species that couldn't adapt quickly enough to changing conditions. Archaeological sites from the late Middle Pleistocene show declining frequencies of large mammal remains and increasing evidence of alternative subsistence strategies. But climate change affected more than just prey availability. It transformed entire landscapes in ways that challenged established territorial and social systems. River courses changed as ice sheets advanced and retreated, altering the locations of reliable water sources. Coastal areas that had supported human populations for thousands of years were submerged by rising seas or abandoned as waters receded. Mountain passes that had served as migration corridors were blocked by advancing glaciers or opened by melting ice, creating new possibilities for population movement while eliminating established routes. Modern humans faced the same environmental challenges that overwhelmed their predecessors. but their responses reveal the advantages of cultural rather than biological adaptation. Archaeological sites from Africa during periods of climate stress show populations developing new hunting technologies, food processing techniques, and social organizations within timescales too short for genetic change. At Pinnacle Point in South Africa, human populations adapted to changing coastal environments by developing sophisticated shellfish harvesting techniques and coastal foraging strategies that allowed them to exploit resources unavailable to inland populations. The key difference lay not in superior physical adaptations, but in behavioral flexibility enabled by sophisticated cultural transmission systems. While other human species were bound by genetically programmed behavioral patterns that had been successful for hundreds of thousands of years, modern humans could modify their subsistence strategies, social organizations, and technologies within single lifetimes in response to changing conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals modern human populations developing new tool technologies specifically designed for changing environmental conditions. During cold periods, they created sophisticated cold weather gear, tailored clothing, insulated shelters, heating systems that could maintain livable temperatures in extreme conditions. During warm periods, they developed technologies for exploiting new food sources, fishing equipment for newly accessible coastal areas, processing tools for plant foods that became available as vegetation zones shifted, hunting technologies designed for the smaller, more agile prey that replaced megafauna in forest environments. Perhaps most importantly, modern humans developed social systems that could maintain knowledge and coordinate responses across the large geographic areas necessary for surviving regional environmental catastrophes. Archaeological evidence from 40,000 years ago shows trade networks that could redistribute resources from areas of abundance to regions experiencing temporary scarcity. Social organizations that could coordinate population movements in response to environmental pressures, and information systems that could preserve and transmit knowledge about environmental cycles across multiple generations. The speed of modern human expansion across the globe occurred during one of the most climatically unstable periods in recent Earth history. Our ancestors colonized Australia during a period of rapidly fluctuating sea levels, reached the Arctic during transitions between glacial and interglacial conditions, and populated the Americas just as the last ice age was ending and the massive environmental changes were transforming North and South American ecosystems. Rather than waiting for stable conditions, modern humans proved capable of successful colonization during periods of maximum environmental instability. This expansion required not just individual adaptability, but collective intelligence systems that could rapidly develop and share solutions to novel environmental challenges. Archaeological sites from early human colonization of extreme environments show evidence of technological innovations that appear to have been developed and refined within single occupation periods, suggesting populations capable of collective problem solving that could generate solutions faster than individual trial and error learning. The colonization of the Arctic represents perhaps the most dramatic example of cultural adaptation outpacing environmental challenge. Within a few thousand years of reaching high latitudes, modern human populations had developed complete technological systems for surviving in conditions more extreme than those faced by cold-adapted Neanderthals. These technologies, including sophisticated clothing systems, portable shelter designs, specialized hunting equipment, and food preservation techniques, represent cultural solutions to environmental challenges that would have taken hundreds of thousands of years to address through genetic adaptation. Recent paleoclimatic reconstructions reveal that modern human expansion often occurred during periods when environmental conditions would have been challenging for any human population. The initial colonization of Europe occurred during a period of extreme climate instability, with temperatures fluctuating by 10 degrees or more within single lifetimes. The settlement of the Americas coincided with the Younger Dryas cooling event when temperatures plummeted and ecosystems across North America experienced rapid transformation. Rather than being deterred by environmental challenges, modern humans seemed to thrive during periods of maximum instability. This success during climatically challenging periods may reflect advantages that emerged from living through environmental instability rather than despite it. Populations that survived frequent environmental challenges developed cultural systems for maintaining knowledge about diverse subsistence strategies, social organizations that could function under varying resource conditions, and technologies that could be rapidly modified for new applications. Environmental instability, selected for flexibility rather than specialization, for cultural systems that could preserve multiple solutions rather than single optimal strategies. The genetic evidence supports this interpretation. Modern human populations show signatures of repeated population bottlenecks and expansions that correlate with major climate transitions, suggesting that our ancestors survived environmental challenges not by maintaining large, stable populations, but by developing cultural systems that could enable small groups to successfully colonize new environments and rebuild populations after environmental catastrophes reduced their numbers. The implications extend beyond simple survival to the development of cultural characteristics that continue to define our species. The environmental challenges of the late Pleistocene may have selected for cognitive traits like forward planning, abstract reasoning, and social cooperation that became fundamental aspects of human psychology. Populations that could anticipate environmental changes, develop contingency plans, and coordinate responses across large social networks would have had enormous advantages during periods of rapid climate change. Archaeological evidence suggests that the cultural innovations developed in response to Pleistocene climate change laid the foundations for all subsequent human technological and social development. The planning abilities that allowed hunter-gatherer populations to survive seasonal resource fluctuations became the basis for agricultural systems that could manage annual planting and harvesting cycles. The social coordination systems that enabled resource sharing during environmental stress became the organizational frameworks for complex civilizations that could coordinate activities across vast populations and extended time periods. As we face our own period of rapid climate change, the archaeological record of human responses to past environmental challenges offers both inspiration and warning. Our ancestors proved that cultural adaptation could outpace environmental change, that human societies could develop technologies and social systems capable of surviving even extreme environmental disruption. But the record also shows that survival required not just technological innovation, but social cooperation, knowledge preservation, and the willingness to abandon established practices when conditions demanded new solutions. The test continues. Was adaptability the true survival of the fittest, not the ability to dominate specific environments, but the capacity to flow like water into new conditions, to find opportunity in disruption, to treat change itself as the only constant worth preparing for? The climate breathes still, and with each exhalation, the world becomes something it has never been before, demanding responses that have never been tried, rewarding flexibility and punishing the beautiful but brittle perfection of overspecialization deep beneath the accumulated sediments of forgotten lakebeds, in caves where darkness has preserved secrets for hundreds of thousands of years, in the careful layers of ancient hearths where time has compressed millennia into inches of soil. The bones of our ancestors wait to tell their stories. They speak not in words, but in the language of chemistry and crystalline structure, in isotope ratios that record ancient meals and migration patterns, in wear marks that reveal the grinding of tools against stone and teeth against the gritty plants of vanished ecosystems. Through these echoes in stone, we can hear faint whispers of humanity's deepest past, voices that tell us not just how our predecessors lived, but why some voices fell silent while others persisted into the present. The bones themselves are libraries written in calcium and phosphate, their internal structure preserving information about growth rates, stress patterns, and the chemical signatures of the environments where their owners lived and died. Neanderthal femurs from European cave sites show bone density patterns that speak of lives spent walking across rough terrain, muscle attachment points that reveal bodies capable of generating forces that would injure modern athletes. The very thickness of their cortical bone tells stories of childhoods spent developing strength that would have been essential for survival in Ice Age landscapes. But it's the chemistry trapped within these bones that reveals their most intimate secrets. Isotope analysis allows us to reconstruct not just what these ancient humans ate, but where they lived, how far they traveled, even the seasons when they died. Carbon isotopes preserved in tooth enamel can distinguish between forest and grassland, diets, between marine and terrestrial food sources, between the chemical signatures of different geographic regions. Nitrogen isotopes reveal trophic levels, whether individuals were primarily meat eaters or consumed significant plant foods, while strontium isotopes can track migrations across landscapes with different underlying geologies. At El Cedron Cave in Spain, isotope analysis of Neanderthal remains has revealed family groups that lived and died together around 49,000 years ago, their bones preserving the chemical evidence of their final meals. The carbon signatures in their tooth enamel show they consumed both meat and plant foods, but in proportions that varied seasonally and individually. Some individuals show evidence of dietary stress, periods when preferred foods were unavailable. and they were forced to consume less nutritious alternatives. Others show isotope patterns, suggesting they had migrated from different regions, possibly indicating marriage patterns or group membership changes. The sophistication of modern analytical techniques allows us to extract information from fossils that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations of archaeologists. Proteomics, the study of ancient proteins preserved in bones and teeth, can now reveal genetic relationships between individuals, sex determination from tiny bone fragments, and even evidence of diseases that affected ancient populations. Recent advances in ancient DNA extraction have allowed researchers to sequence complete genomes from fossils tens of thousands of years old, revealing not just evolutionary relationships, but detailed information about population sizes, migration patterns, and interbreeding between different human species. From Denisovan finger bones discovered in Siberian caves, we've extracted DNA that reveals an entire previously unknown human lineage, one that interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans, and contributed genetic material that persists in modern Asian and Oceanian populations. The Denisovan genome tells stories of adaptation to high-altitude environments, of populations that developed genetic variants for processing oxygen in low-pressure conditions that are still present in modern Tibetan populations. Neanderthal DNA extracted from bones found across Europe and Western Asia has revolutionized our understanding of human evolution and the processes that led to modern human survival. The Neanderthal genome reveals populations with genetic diversity lower than modern humans, suggesting smaller, effective population sizes that may have made them more vulnerable to environmental stresses. It also shows evidence of inbreeding, depression in later populations, possibly indicating that declining numbers led to mating between close relatives that reduced overall fitness. But perhaps most remarkably, Neanderthal DNA has revealed that they didn't entirely disappear. They were partially absorbed into modern human populations through interbreeding. Most non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, concentrated in genes affecting immune function, skin and hair characteristics, and metabolic processes. Some of these inherited variants appear to have been beneficial, providing advantages for surviving in non-African environments that modern humans originally lacked. The archaeological context surrounding fossil discoveries provides equally important information about the lives and deaths of ancient humans. The careful excavation and analysis of burial sites reveals evidence of symbolic behavior, social organization, and belief systems that extend far beyond what bones alone can tell us. Neanderthal burials show evidence of deliberate placement of bodies, sometimes with grave goods, that suggest concepts of identity that extended beyond death. Modern human burials from similar time periods show increasing complexity in burial practices, with elaborate grave goods and body positioning that implies sophisticated belief systems about death and social status. Tool associations with fossil remains provide windows into the technological capabilities and cultural traditions of different human species. Heidelbergensis sites show association with sophisticated Acheulean hand axes that remained essentially unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years, suggesting cultural traditions with remarkable stability but limited innovation. Neanderthal sites show more diverse tool assemblages with evidence of regional variation and some technological change over time, but still within relatively conservative traditions compared to contemporary modern human sites. Modern human sites from 40,000 years ago onward show explosive technological diversity with rapid innovation and extensive regional variation. Tool assemblages change significantly within single sites over relatively short periods, suggesting populations engaged in active technological experimentation and improvement. The presence of long-distance trade materials, shells from coastal areas found hundreds of miles inland, high-quality stone tools made from exotic materials, indicates social networks and exchange systems of unprecedented complexity. Microscopic analysis of stone tools reveals information about their use that extends far beyond their obvious functions. Where pattern analysis can determine whether tools were used for cutting meat, processing plant materials, working wood, or scraping hides. Residue analysis can identify the specific materials, tools contacted, blood proteins that reveal what animals were hunted, plant starches that indicate gathered foods, even microscopic traces of ochre that suggest tools used for artistic purposes. The geographic distribution of fossil sites provides information about population densities, migration patterns, and territorial ranges that helps explain the relative success of different human species. Neanderthal sites are concentrated in Europe and Western Asia, with evidence for relatively small territories and limited long-distance movement. Modern human sites show much more extensive geographic distribution and evidence for long-distance migration and colonization of previously unoccupied territories. Fire sites associated with different human species reveal sophisticated differences in pyrotechnology that may have contributed to differential survival success. Neanderthal fire sites show evidence of sophisticated fire control and maintenance, but relatively conservative use patterns focused on heating, cooking, and basics. Tool manufacture. Modern human fire sites show more diverse applications, including evidence for complex food processing techniques, sophisticated tool manufacturing processes, and possibly even primitive metallurgy. The taphonomic processes that affect fossil preservation provide their own sources of information about ancient environments and the circumstances of death. Bones that show evidence of carnivore damage tell stories of competition with large predators, while those found in cave deposits may indicate deliberate burial or shelter use. The chemical conditions that allowed some fossils to preserve ancient DNA while others retain only mineral components reflect the environmental histories of their burial sites. Recent advances in dating techniques have allowed much more precise temporal frameworks for human evolution and the processes that led to the extinction of non-sapient species. Radiocarbon dating of the youngest Neanderthal sites suggests they persisted until at least 28,000 years ago in some regions, indicating thousands of years of potential coexistence with modern humans. Luminescence, dating of sediments associated with early modern human sites, has pushed back the timing of their expansion out of Africa and colonization of other continents. The isotope signatures preserved in ancient bones also provide information about paleo-environments and climate conditions that help explain the environmental pressures faced by different human species. Oxygen isotopes from tooth enamel can reconstruct ancient temperature and precipitation patterns, while carbon isotopes from surrounding sediments reveal information about vegetation changes and ecosystem transitions. These environmental reconstructions allow us to correlate human evolutionary changes with specific climate events and ecological transitions. As we piece together these fragments of ancient lives, chemical signatures that reveal last meals eaten tens of thousands of years ago, wear patterns that show how tools were held and used, DNA sequences that preserve family relationships across geological time. We begin to hear the voices of the vanished speaking across the vast silence of deep time. They tell stories of adaptation and failure, of lives lived at the edge of survival, of innovations that changed the world, and conservatism that proved fatal when worlds changed too quickly to track. The bones remember what flesh has forgotten, preserving in their crystalline structure the evidence of humanity's deepest struggles and greatest achievements. Through isotopes and DNA, through wear patterns and chemical residues, we can reconstruct not just the bare facts of ancient existence, but glimpses of the hopes and fears, the successes and failures, the daily realities of lives that shaped our species' destiny. These echoes in stone remind us that we are the inheritors of struggles we can barely imagine, the beneficiaries of innovations preserved in the archaeological record, the temporary custodians of stories that stretch back through geological time to the very origins of human consciousness itself. In the quiet spaces between scientific certainty and imagination, where known facts give way to speculation and the archaeological record falls silent, we sometimes wonder about the shadows that might lurk just beyond the reach of our knowledge. What if the story we tell ourselves about human development, the steady progression from simple stone tools to complex civilizations, misses crucial chapters that time has erased? What if some of our vanished cousins accomplished things that left no trace in the geological record, created achievements that dissolved completely into the deep past, developed forms of knowledge that we lost when their voices fell silent forever? The question haunts us because we know how easily even our own technological achievements could vanish without trace. If human civilization disappeared tomorrow, what would remain after 100,000 years? Our cities would crumble, our metals would rust, our plastics might persist, but would be scattered by geological processes across strata that future archaeologists might never examine. Only a few materials, ceramics, some stone constructions, certain radioactive isotopes, would survive in recognizable form. The vast majority of our knowledge, our art, our accumulated wisdom exists in forms too fragile to persist across the timescales that separate us from Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, or the long-vanished Erectus populations. Recent archaeological discoveries have begun revealing unexpected sophistication in human cultures much older than we previously imagined. The Göbekli Tepe complex in Turkey, with its massive stone pillars and sophisticated astronomical alignments dates to nearly 12,000 years ago, constructed by hunter-gatherer populations that we once assumed lacked the social organization necessary for such monumental projects. If mobile foraging societies could create architectural complexes that rival later civilizations, what might earlier human species have accomplished during the hundreds of thousands of years they dominated their respective regions? Neanderthal sites have yielded evidence of behaviors that challenge our assumptions about their cognitive capabilities and cultural complexity. At Bruniquel Cave in France, Neanderthal populations constructed circular arrangements of broken stalagmites deep underground, creating structures that served no obvious practical purpose, but required coordinated group effort and planning to complete. The construction dates to 176,000 years ago, making it among the oldest known human-built structures anywhere in the world. The effort required to break, transport, and arrange the limestone formations suggests cultural motivations that extended far beyond immediate survival needs. More intriguingly, some researchers have suggested that certain Neanderthal behaviors may indicate proto-religious or ceremonial activities that left only the faintest traces in the archaeological record. Bare bones arranged in apparent patterns in alpine caves, collections of unusual stones gathered from distant locations, evidence of bodies deliberately placed in specific positions. These hints suggest minds capable of symbolic thinking about relationships between the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen, the temporary and the permanent. The specialized hunting cultures of Heidelbergensis may have developed sophisticated knowledge systems that we can barely glimpse through scattered archaeological remains. Their ability to repeatedly and successfully hunt megafauna like straight-tusked elephants and giant deer required not just individual skill, but coordinated group strategies, detailed knowledge of animal behavior, and possibly even rudimentary forms of seasonal calendars and territorial management. Some researchers speculate that Heidelbergensis populations may have developed proto-scientific understanding of ecology, migration patterns, and resource management that allowed them to sustain large-scale hunting operations for hundreds of thousands of years. The extraordinary temporal persistence of Erectus populations, nearly 2 million years of successful adaptation across multiple continents, suggests cultural achievements that may have been far more sophisticated than their simple tool technologies indicate. Their ability to maintain fire across vast distances, to navigate oceanic barriers to reach islands like Java, to adapt to radically different environments from tropical Africa to temperate Asia, implies knowledge systems of remarkable complexity. Some researchers have proposed that Erectus populations may have developed sophisticated oral traditions, navigational techniques, and environmental knowledge that allowed them to succeed in environments where later human species struggled. Consider the possibility that these earlier human species developed technologies that have left no archaeological trace. Wood, plant fibers, animal products, and organic compounds comprise the majority of materials used by most hunter-gatherer societies, but these materials rarely survive in archaeological contexts for more than a few thousand years. If Neanderthals developed sophisticated textile technologies. If Heidelbergensis created complex wooden constructions, if Erectus populations built elaborate structures from perishable materials, we would have no direct evidence of these achievements. Recent ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherer societies reveal knowledge systems of extraordinary sophistication that leave minimal archaeological traces but require generations to develop and maintain. Australian Aboriginal populations possess navigational knowledge that allows accurate travel across thousands of miles of seemingly featureless terrain, botanical knowledge that can identify hundreds of plant species and their seasonal availability, astronomical knowledge that can predict environmental changes months in advance. If similar knowledge systems developed among ancient human populations, they would have represented tremendous cultural achievements that are effectively invisible in the archaeological record. The genetic evidence adds another layer of mystery to questions about lost achievements. Ancient DNA reveals that modern human populations absorbed genetic material not just from Neanderthals and Denisovans, but from at least two additional archaic human lineages that we know about only through their genetic signatures in modern populations. These ghost populations contributed genetic material that persists in contemporary humans, but we know nothing about their cultural achievements, their technological capabilities, or their reasons for eventual disappearance. Some of the genetic variants we inherited from these vanished populations appear to have been advantageous, contributing to immune function, altitude adaptation, and resistance to specific diseases. This suggests that the populations that contributed these genes had undergone sophisticated evolutionary adaptations to specific environmental challenges, but adaptation to high altitudes, disease resistance, and other complex physiological challenges often requires not just genetic changes but cultural innovations, knowledge about medicinal plants, understanding of seasonal resource availability, social systems that can support populations through environmental stress. The genetic evidence hints at cultural achievements that may have been far more sophisticated than we can reconstruct from archaeological remains alone. The deep ocean floors and continental shelves that were exposed during Ice Age periods of low sea level may contain archaeological sites that could revolutionize our understanding of ancient human achievements. During much of the time when Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, and Erectus populations thrived, sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than today, exposing vast areas of continental shelf that are now underwater. Coastal regions often support higher population densities and more complex cultural developments than inland areas. So the most sophisticated achievements of ancient human populations may now lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean water. Recent underwater archaeological discoveries have revealed sophisticated technologies and cultural complexes that were completely unknown from terrestrial sites. The submerged landscapes around Britain, for example, have yielded evidence of complex hunter-gatherer societies that were far more sophisticated than anything known from contemporary inland sites. If similar discoveries await on the continental shelves that were exposed during ancient periods of low sea level, they could reveal achievements by early human species that would completely transform our understanding of their capabilities. The possibility that some ancient human populations developed forms of knowledge preservation that have left no direct archaeological traces, represents one of the most intriguing speculative possibilities. Modern hunter-gatherer societies often possess sophisticated systems for encoding and preserving practical knowledge in songs, stories, and ritual practices that can maintain information accuracy across hundreds of generations. If ancient human populations developed similar systems, they could have preserved and transmitted complex technical knowledge, environmental information, and cultural innovations across timescales that dwarf recorded history. Astronomical knowledge represents a particularly intriguing possibility. Many ancient sites show evidence of astronomical alignments and observations that suggest sophisticated understanding of celestial cycles. If earlier human populations developed similar knowledge systems, they could have possessed predictive capabilities about seasonal changes, resource availability, and environmental cycles that would have provided enormous survival advantages. Such knowledge systems could have been transmitted entirely through oral traditions and observational practices that would leave no archaeological traces. The symbolic and artistic capabilities revealed by recent Neanderthal discoveries raise questions about whether earlier human species may have developed symbolic systems of far greater complexity than we can currently demonstrate. If symbolic thinking capabilities were present among multiple human lineages, it's possible that they developed artistic traditions, symbolic communication systems, and abstract conceptual frameworks that approached the complexity of early modern human achievements, but utilized materials or methods that haven't been preserved in the archaeological record. Perhaps most speculatively, some researchers have wondered whether certain human populations might have developed early forms of science, systematic observation, and knowledge accumulation about natural processes that allowed them to predict and manipulate environmental conditions with unprecedented sophistication. The long-term success of species like Erectus and Heidelbergensis suggests they may have possessed understanding of ecological relationships, climate cycles, and resource management that went far beyond simple survival skills. The shadows of these possible lost achievements remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that the archaeological record preserves only a tiny fraction of ancient human activities, and that our understanding of human cognitive and cultural evolution remains profoundly incomplete. The silence of vanished species may conceal not just different ways of being human, but different ways of understanding and interacting with the natural world that we lost when their populations disappeared. As we probe deeper into the past with increasingly sophisticated analytical techniques, as we explore previously inaccessible archaeological contexts like underwater sites and deep cave systems, as we develop new methods for extracting information from ancient materials, we may discover that the story of human development is far more complex and remarkable than we currently imagine. The shadows of lost civilizations may eventually reveal achievements that would astonish us, knowledge systems that would challenge our assumptions about the trajectory of human development, and forms of wisdom that we desperately need to rediscover as we face our own uncertain future. In the deepest moments of contemplation, when the mind drifts beyond the immediate concerns of daily existence and touches something vast and patient, that underlies all temporary things. We sometimes sense that we are participants in a story much larger than human consciousness, much older than species, much more enduring than any individual life or civilization. This is the story that planets tell, a slow narrative of accumulation and dissolution, of information gathered in stone and sediment, of memory preserved in crystalline structures that outlast continents, of entropy and the endless struggle between order and chaos that has been unfolding since the first atoms condensed from the primordial fire of creation. Earth remembers everything, but in languages we are only beginning to learn how to read. In the layered sediments of ancient lake beds, in the chemistry of ice cores that preserve atmospheric conditions from hundreds of thousands of years ago, in the isotope ratios trapped in marine shells, and the magnetic orientations frozen in volcanic rocks, our planet maintains archives of vanished worlds more complete and accurate than any human library. These geological records preserve not just the physical conditions of ancient environments, but the traces of every organism that ever lived, every ecological interaction that ever occurred, every evolutionary experiment that succeeded or failed across the 4 billion-year history of life on Earth. The human story, remarkable as it seems to us, occupies barely a sentence in this planetary memoir. All of human evolution, from the earliest Australopithecines to modern civilizations, spans less than 7 million years. A brief episode in a planet that has been hosting life for over 4 billion years. A fleeting moment in a cosmos that has been evolving for nearly 14 billion years. Yet within this cosmic instant, human consciousness has emerged as something genuinely unprecedented, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own origins, question its own existence, and wonder about its ultimate fate. The disappearance of Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis, Erectus, and other human species represents more than simple extinction events. These losses constitute the irreversible dissipation of information, the permanent destruction of evolutionary experiments that required millions of years to develop and can never be replicated exactly. Each vanished species took with it unique genetic combinations, cultural innovations, and ways of experiencing reality that are now lost forever to the universe. Their extinction represents a form of cosmic forgetting, the erasure of possibilities that will never exist again. Entropy, the fundamental tendency of organized systems to become progressively more disordered over time, provides the physical framework within which all evolution occurs. Living organisms represent temporary violations of entropy's general rule, complex, highly organized systems that maintain themselves by constantly consuming energy and excreting waste, creating local pockets of increased order at the expense of increased disorder in their surroundings. But entropy always wins in the end. Every individual organism dies. Every species eventually becomes extinct. Every ecosystem ultimately transforms into something different or disappears entirely. Yet life has discovered a way to fight entropy that seems almost magical in its effectiveness. The ability to preserve and transmit information across time in forms that can persist long after the physical structures that first encoded them have decayed and vanished. DNA represents One such information preservation system, a molecular archive that has maintained crucial biological instructions across billions of years and countless generations, allowing complex organisms to rebuild themselves from simple chemical components over and over again. Cultural traditions represent another systems for preserving and transmitting behavioral and technological innovations across generations without requiring genetic inheritance. The human lineages that disappeared may have developed their own information preservation systems that we can barely glimpse through the archaeological record. Neanderthal cultural traditions that remained essentially unchanged for tens of thousands of years represent successful information transmission systems that preserved crucial survival knowledge across hundreds of generations. The stone tool traditions of Erectus populations, maintained across nearly 2 million years and 3 continents, demonstrate information preservation capabilities that rival biological inheritance for stability and geographic reach. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of human information systems is their capacity for cumulative improvement, the ability not just to preserve information across time, but to build upon it, modify it, and create new forms of knowledge that transcend anything achievable by individual organisms. Modern human cultural systems represent the most sophisticated information processing and preservation networks ever developed by any known form of life, capable of accumulating knowledge across thousands of generations and coordinating activities across millions of individuals. This information processing capability may explain why modern humans survived while other human species disappeared. In a universe governed by entropy, where all organized systems tend toward dissolution, survival belongs to those systems that can most effectively gather, process, preserve, and apply information about changing conditions, while other human species developed impressive but relatively static adaptations to specific environmental conditions. Modern humans created information systems capable of rapid adaptation to novel challenges. The archaeological record reveals this information processing revolution in action. While Neanderthal sites show remarkable consistency in tool traditions and subsistence strategies across vast geographic areas and extended time periods, modern human sites show explosive innovation and regional variation that suggests populations engaged in active experimentation and knowledge sharing. The speed with which modern humans developed technologies for surviving in completely novel environments, the Arctic, Australia, high altitudes, indicates information processing capabilities that could generate solutions faster than individual trial and error learning. From a planetary perspective, the emergence of human consciousness represents something unprecedented in Earth's history. The development of information processing systems sophisticated enough to understand and potentially influence geological and ecological processes. We have become the first species capable of comprehending our planet's history, predicting its future changes, and potentially directing its evolution in ways that serve conscious purposes rather than blind physical processes. But this unprecedented capability comes with correspondingly unprecedented responsibilities. We are not just participants in Earth's ongoing evolution, we have become its temporary stewards, the first organisms in the planet's history with the cognitive capability to understand the consequences of our actions and make deliberate choices about our planet's future. The disappearance of other human species serves as a reminder of how easily even sophisticated information processing systems can fail when faced with challenges beyond their adaptive capacity. The genetic material we inherited from vanished human species represents a form of molecular memory that preserves traces of their evolutionary achievements within our own biological systems. Neanderthal genes that contribute to immune function, cold tolerance, and other adaptive capabilities allow us to benefit from evolutionary innovations developed over hundreds of thousands of years by populations that no longer exist as distinct species. In a sense, their information systems haven't been entirely lost. They've been incorporated into our own genetic and cultural inheritance. Recent discoveries in astrobiology suggest that information processing and preservation may be fundamental characteristics of life wherever it emerges in the universe. The ability to maintain complex organization in the face of entropy's relentless pressure appears to be what distinguishes living from non-living systems. From this perspective, the evolution of increasingly sophisticated information processing capabilities represents a natural progression that may be inevitable wherever life achieves sufficient complexity. The development of technology capable of preserving information outside biological systems, writing, recording, digital storage, represents another threshold in the universe's ongoing battle against entropy. We have become the first known organisms capable of creating information storage and processing systems that can potentially outlast our own species. Preserving knowledge and culture in forms that could survive even major extinction events. But technology alone is insufficient to guarantee information preservation. The disappearance of other human species reminds us that even sophisticated cultural systems can be lost if the populations that maintain them face challenges beyond their adaptive capacity. The preservation of information across cosmic time requires not just technological capability, but social systems capable of maintaining continuity across generations and environmental changes that could disrupt technological infrastructure. The question of whether human consciousness will persist long enough to become a permanent feature of cosmic evolution remains open. Our species has existed for only a few 100,000 years, barely an instant in geological time. The civilizations that have created our most sophisticated technologies have existed for only a few thousand years. We have no guarantee that our information processing systems will prove more durable than those developed by the human species that preceded us. Yet the stakes of our success or failure extend beyond our own survival. We have become the universe's first known attempt to understand itself through conscious observation and analysis. Our scientific achievements represent the cosmos becoming self-aware, matter organized in such a way that it can comprehend the physical laws that govern its own behavior. If human consciousness disappears, the universe may return to unconscious evolution for millions or billions of years before another species develops comparable cognitive capabilities. The memory of planets operates on timescales that dwarf human comprehension, but it appears to be building towards something unprecedented, the emergence of conscious beings capable of understanding and directing cosmic evolution rather than simply participating in it unconsciously. The disappearance of other human species may have been necessary steps in this process, evolutionary experiments that contributed genetic and cultural innovations to the lineage that eventually produced modern humans, but which were themselves too specialized or limited to achieve the cognitive breakthroughs necessary for cosmic self-awareness. As we contemplate our place in this vast story of planetary memory and cosmic evolution, we're reminded that we are both products and participants in processes much larger than ourselves. We carry within our bodies the genetic heritage of vanished species, within our cultures the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, within our consciousness the universe's first attempts to understand its own nature. Whether we succeed in preserving and expanding this cosmic self-awareness depends on our ability to learn from the silence of our predecessors, to avoid the limitations that led to their disappearance, and to create information preservation systems robust enough to survive the challenges that await us in an uncertain future. The planetary memory continues to accumulate layer by layer, recording our struggles and achievements in the same patient detail with which it preserved the stories of those who walked before us. Whether our chapter in this vast narrative becomes a brief episode of failed potential or the beginning of consciousness becoming a permanent feature of cosmic evolution, remains to be written in the languages of stone, ice, and the quantum structures that encode information across the endless expanses of space and time. As darkness settles over the landscapes where once our cousins walked, and silence fills the valleys that echoed with voices now forever stilled, we are left with the most haunting question of all. Why us? Why did we, fragile, late-arriving Homo sapiens, survive the great winnowing that claimed every other human species? Was it cooperation, imagination, luck, or something more elusive that crowned us the last humans standing? The answer, when we piece it together from scattered evidence across disciplines and deep time, reveals not a simple triumph of the superior, but a complex convergence of factors that transformed our apparent weaknesses into unprecedented strengths. Multiple theories compete in the scientific literature, each capturing part of the truth, none sufficient alone to explain our unlikely persistence. Some researchers emphasize our superior capacity for social cooperation, pointing to archaeological evidence of trade networks that stretched across continents when other species remained within relatively small territorial ranges. Others focus on cognitive advantages, our enhanced abilities for abstract reasoning, symbolic thinking, and cultural innovation that allowed us to solve problems faster than genetic evolution could provide biological solutions. Still others suggest that we benefited from fortunate timing, arriving in key regions, just as environmental changes were undermining other species' survival strategies. But perhaps the most profound factor was our development of what we might call cultural metabolism, the ability to process and transform information at speeds that approached biological processes in their efficiency, yet transcended them in their flexibility and cumulative power. While other human species were bound by the conservative pace of genetic inheritance and simple cultural transmission, We learned to create knowledge, systems that could preserve innovations indefinitely, combine separate discoveries into new technologies, and modify behavioral patterns within single lifetimes in response to changing circumstances. Archaeological sites from 40,000 years ago reveal this cultural metabolism in full operation. Tools change significantly within single occupation layers, suggesting populations engaged in active technological experimentation. Art styles show rapid evolution and regional variation that indicates information sharing across vast social networks. Resource extraction and processing show evidence of specialized knowledge that could only have been developed through collective learning and systematic knowledge preservation across multiple generations. The speed of our technological and cultural evolution during this period was unprecedented in human history. Within a few thousand years, modern human populations developed technologies for surviving in completely novel environments. Sophisticated, cold weather gear for Arctic colonization, watercraft capable of ocean crossings to reach Australia, high altitude adaptations for mountain environments. This rate of innovation suggests information processing capabilities that could generate solutions to novel challenges faster than the time required for genetic adaptation to the same environmental pressures. Perhaps most crucially, we developed social systems that could support much larger and more complex populations than those maintained by other human species. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal groups rarely exceeded 50 individuals and remained relatively isolated from each other across the landscape. Modern human sites from the same period show evidence of social networks that could coordinate activities across hundreds of individuals and maintain contact across vast geographic regions. These large social networks provided multiple advantages that compounded over time. Larger populations maintain greater genetic diversity, reducing the risks of inbreeding depression that may have affected smaller Neanderthal populations. They can support greater specialization, allowing individuals to develop expertise in specific technologies or knowledge domains that benefit the entire group. Most importantly, they provide redundancy for knowledge preservation. If environmental catastrophes or population crashes eliminate some groups, crucial information can survive in other parts of the network. The genetic evidence adds complexity to this social cooperation hypothesis. Recent studies reveal that modern human populations outside Africa carry DNA from multiple archaic human species, not just Neanderthals, but Denisovans, and at least two additional ghost populations that we know about only through their genetic signatures. This suggests that our success involved not just competition with other human species, but selective absorption of their genetic innovations through limited interbreeding. Some of the genetic variants we inherited from these archaic populations appear to have been crucial for surviving in non-African environments. Neanderthal genes contribute to immune function, cold tolerance, and skin characteristics that provided advantages for European and Asian colonization. Denisovan genes contributed high-altitude adaptations that allowed successful colonization of the Tibetan Plateau. In essence, we succeeded partly by incorporating the biological innovations that other human species had developed through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in specific environments. This genetic absorption may have provided advantages that went beyond simple biological adaptation. When we inherited genetic variants from other human species, we may also have inherited behavioral tendencies, cognitive capabilities, and cultural knowledge that had been associated with those genetic lineages. The archaeological record shows that late Neanderthal sites sometimes contain technologies and artistic expressions that seem to reflect influence from modern human populations, while early modern human sites in Europe show adoption of some Neanderthal tool-making techniques. Environmental factors provided the context within which our advantages could be expressed and tested. The late Pleistocene was a period of extreme climate instability, with temperatures fluctuating rapidly and ecosystems undergoing constant transformation. These conditions favored populations with behavioral flexibility rather than those with genetic specializations for specific environmental conditions. Our cultural metabolism allowed us to adapt to changing conditions within lifetimes rather than across evolutionary timescales. The megafaunal extinctions that occurred during our global expansion may have been both consequence and cause of our success. Our sophisticated hunting technologies and coordinated social systems made us exceptionally effective at exploiting large mammal populations. As we colonized new regions, local megafauna often disappeared within a few thousand years, sometimes through direct hunting pressure, sometimes through ecosystem disruptions caused by human activities like landscape burning. These extinctions may have undermined the survival strategies of competing human species that had specialized for hunting specific types of large prey. Neanderthal populations that had perfected techniques for hunting mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and cave bear would have found these skills less useful as their preferred prey species disappeared. Meanwhile, our flexible cultural systems allowed us to rapidly develop alternative subsistence strategies based on smaller game, plant foods, and aquatic resources. But technological and social advantages alone cannot fully explain our survival. Luck, or more precisely, the intersection of our capabilities with favorable environmental and demographic circumstances, played a crucial role. We expanded out of Africa during a period when climate conditions were relatively favorable for long-distance migration. We reached Australia and the Americas during periods when sea levels and ice sheets created favorable conditions for colonization. We encountered other human species during periods when their populations may already have been stressed by environmental changes. Demographic factors may have been especially important. Computer models suggest that small differences in population, growth rates, territorial ranges, or survival during environmental crises could have led to very different outcomes in competition between human species. If Neanderthal populations had maintained slightly larger social networks, if Heidelbergensis had developed more flexible subsistence strategies, if environmental changes had occurred at different rates or in different sequences, the trajectory of human evolution might have been completely different. The development of symbolic thinking may have provided advantages that were initially subtle but became increasingly important over time. Our ability to create and manipulate abstract symbols allowed us to develop belief systems that could coordinate behavior across large populations and extended time periods. Archaeological evidence suggests we were the first human species to develop concepts of identity that could unite individuals who had never met, moral systems that could regulate behavior in the absence of direct supervision, and planning frameworks that could coordinate activities across seasonal cycles and generational time spans. These symbolic capabilities may have been especially important during periods of environmental stress, when resources became scarce or familiar territories became uninhabitable. Populations with shared belief systems and cultural identities could maintain cooperation and coordination even when scattered across vast geographic areas. The ability to preserve and transmit cultural knowledge through symbolic systems meant that innovations developed in one region could be shared across entire species ranges, while knowledge about environmental cycles and resource availability could be preserved across multiple generations. Recent archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new dimensions of our evolutionary advantages. Evidence for sophisticated astronomical knowledge, complex medicinal practices, and systematic environmental management suggests that our ancestors developed forms of scientific understanding that allowed them to predict and manipulate natural processes with unprecedented accuracy. These knowledge systems provided survival advantages that would have been invisible to other species, but crucial during periods of environmental change. The question of why we survived while others disappeared may ultimately be unanswerable in any simple or definitive way. Our success appears to have resulted from the intersection of multiple factors: genetic diversity, cultural flexibility, social cooperation, technological innovation, environmental luck, and perhaps most importantly, the development of information processing systems that could adapt faster than environmental changes could overwhelm them. What seems certain is that our survival was not inevitable or predetermined. The archaeological record reveals other human species that were successful for hundreds of thousands of years, that developed sophisticated technologies and cultural systems, that possessed cognitive capabilities approaching our own. Their disappearance reminds us that evolutionary success provides no guarantees about future survival, that even the most well-adapted species can face challenges beyond their capacity to overcome. As we contemplate our unlikely persistence in a world that claimed so many other experiments in human consciousness, we are reminded that survival is always temporary, that our current dominance is as fragile as that of our predecessors, that the same forces that eliminated other human species continue to operate in our own time. We remain not because we are inherently superior, but because we happened to develop the right combination of capabilities at the right time in the right circumstances to survive challenges that overwhelmed our cousins. The humility of this recognition may be our greatest survival asset as we face an uncertain future in which the challenges awaiting us may be as unprecedented as those that faced our predecessors, requiring adaptations as profound as those that allowed us to outlast giants and inherit a planet that was once home to many different ways of being human. In the final moments before sleep takes us, in that liminal space where consciousness touches something deeper than thought, we sometimes feel the presence of the vanished ones, not as ghosts or spirits, but as absences that shape our world. through their very silence, they are the negative spaces in the human story, the paths not taken, the voices that fell quiet before they could finish their songs. As we look into mirrors and see our own fragile faces, we carry within us the dust of all who walked before us, the genetic fragments of the disappeared, the cultural echoes of experiments in consciousness that stretched across hundreds of thousands of years before culminating in our unlikely survival. Neanderthal genes flow through our bloodstreams, contributing to the immune responses that protect us from diseases, the metabolic pathways that allow us to survive in climates our African ancestors never knew, the neural architecture that processes sensory information from worlds they helped us learn to inhabit. When we feel the cold bite of winter air, or taste the satisfaction of cooked meat, when our bodies fight off infections, or our minds recognize patterns in natural phenomena, we are experiencing life through biological systems that carry the innovations of populations that vanished 40,000 years ago, yet live on in the cellular machinery that sustains our daily existence. Denisovan genetic variants persist in modern Asian populations, providing advantages for high-altitude survival that allow millions of people to thrive in mountain environments that would be lethal without these ancient adaptations. When Tibetan children play in the thin air of the Himalayas, when Andean families cultivate crops at altitudes that challenge most humans, they are drawing on evolutionary innovations developed by human species that disappeared before the pyramids were built, before agriculture was invented, before our ancestors learned to write their first words. The cultural inheritance is subtler, but no less profound. Archaeological evidence suggests that late Neanderthal populations adopted some technologies and artistic expressions from early modern humans, while our ancestors incorporated Neanderthal innovations into their own cultural traditions. The sophisticated stone tool techniques that allowed modern humans to colonize Europe may have been refined through interaction with Neanderthal populations who had perfected these technologies over hundreds of thousands of years. When we create art, when we develop tools, when we solve problems through systematic observation and experimentation, we may be building on foundations laid by minds whose thoughts we can no longer directly access. Even our capacity for language, our ability to create meaning through symbols and share ideas across time and space, may have been influenced by cognitive innovations developed by other human species. Recent archaeological discoveries suggest that Neanderthals possessed symbolic capabilities more sophisticated than previously recognized, creating art, using ornaments, engaging in ritualized behaviors that imply minds capable of abstract thinking about relationships between past, present, and future. If these capabilities influenced our own development through cultural contact or genetic inheritance, then our most distinctively human traits may carry the contributions of species that no longer exist except as echoes in our own consciousness. The landscapes we inhabit are shaped by their absence as much as by our presence. European forests that might have been managed by Neanderthal populations for hundreds of thousands of years more were transformed by their disappearance into ecosystems that evolved without the human influence that had shaped them for millennia. African environments that had been modified by Erectus populations for nearly 2 million years underwent ecological transitions when those ancient land managers finally vanished. We have inherited a planet that was already transformed by human activity long before our species achieved dominance, an Earth whose current configurations reflect not just natural processes, but the cumulative effects of countless generations of human interaction stretching back into deep time. The technologies that allow us to survive in extreme environments, to process difficult foods, to coordinate activities across vast social networks may have been developed through trial and error by human populations whose experiments with living we can barely reconstruct from scattered archaeological remains. When we use fire for cooking, when we create shelters that protect us from weather, when we develop tools that extend our physical capabilities, we are employing techniques that were refined across hundreds of thousands of years by human species that paid the ultimate price for their innovations, their own extinction, to provide us with the cultural foundations that made our survival possible. Our aesthetic sensibilities, our capacity for creating and appreciating beauty may carry influences from artistic traditions developed by other human species. The cave paintings of Europe show technical sophistication and artistic vision that could not have emerged without extensive cultural development and knowledge transmission across multiple generations. If Neanderthal populations contributed to these artistic traditions through cultural exchange or genetic influence, then our ability to see beauty in natural forms, to create visual representations of abstract concepts, to find meaning in color and pattern may reflect sensitivities that were developed by minds that no longer exist except as contributors to our own perceptual capabilities. Even our social organizations, our methods for maintaining cooperation across large populations and extended time periods may incorporate innovations developed by other human species. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthal populations maintained complex social structures, cared for disabled group members, and developed cultural traditions that persisted across thousands of generations. If these social innovations influenced our own development, then our capacity for empathy, our ability to cooperate with strangers, our willingness to care for those who cannot contribute immediately to group survival may reflect moral sensibilities that were shaped by evolutionary experiments in social organization that began long before our species appeared. The silence of their voices reminds us that consciousness itself is fragile, that the ability to experience beauty, to wonder about origins and meanings, to create art and preserve knowledge across generations represents achievements that required millions of years to develop and can be lost in geological instants. Each vanished species took with it unique ways of experiencing reality, specific approaches to solving the challenges of existence, particular combinations of cognitive capabilities that will never exist again in exactly the same forms. Yet their disappearance also highlights the remarkable persistence of information across deep time. While their bodies have decayed and their cultures have been forgotten, their genetic contributions persist in modern populations. Their technological innovations continue to influence our approaches to survival challenges, Their artistic achievements provide inspiration for our own creative expressions. They have achieved a form of immortality through incorporation into the biological and cultural systems that sustain our current existence. The fossil record preserves traces of their daily lives, the bones of animals they hunted, the stones they shaped into tools, the hearths where they gathered to share food and warmth. Each archaeological site represents a moment frozen in time, a glimpse into lives that were as real and immediate to their inhabitants as our own lives are to us. When we excavate their remains, when we analyze the chemistry of their bones, when we reconstruct their diets and movements and social interactions, we are recovering stories that would otherwise be lost forever to the indifferent passage of geological time. Their genetic legacy continues to evolve within our own populations. Natural selection continues to act on the archaic genetic variants we inherited, favoring some in certain environments while eliminating others. The Neanderthal and Denisovan genes that persist in modern humans are not static relics, but active components of ongoing evolutionary processes that will shape the future development of our species. In a sense, they continue to participate in human evolution long after their distinct populations disappeared. Our scientific understanding of their existence provides a form of resurrection, not of their individual consciousness, but of knowledge about their achievements, their struggles, their contributions to the human story. Through paleogenetics, archaeological reconstruction, and comparative analysis, we can recover aspects of their experience that had been lost for tens of thousands of years. We can learn about their diets, their migrations, their social organizations, their technological capabilities in detail that would have been impossible for their contemporary observers to document. This scientific resurrection carries responsibilities. As the only surviving human species, we have become the custodians of their memory, the preservers of their stories, the inheritors of their achievements. Our choices about how we use the genetic variants they contributed, how we apply the technological knowledge they developed, how we understand the lessons their extinctions might teach us, will determine whether their disappearance was a tragic waste of evolutionary potential or a necessary contribution to the emergence of a human consciousness capable of understanding and directing its own development. The question of whether we will avoid their fate remains open. We face environmental challenges as severe as those that contributed to their disappearance, social pressures that threaten the cultural systems that have enabled our success, technological developments that could either enhance our survival capabilities or create new forms of existential risk. Our survival is not guaranteed by past success any more than theirs was guaranteed by hundreds of thousands of years of successful adaptation, but their legacy provides both warning and inspiration. Their disappearance reminds us that survival requires not just adaptation to current conditions, but flexibility to face futures that cannot be predicted. Their contributions to our own existence demonstrate that evolutionary experiments, even those that end in extinction, can provide lasting value through the innovations they contribute to subsequent developments. Their silence teaches us humility about our own permanence, while their achievements inspire us to use our temporary dominance responsibly. As consciousness drifts toward the peaceful territory of sleep as the day's immediate concerns dissolve into the timeless quiet of rest. We can sense their presence in the spaces between our thoughts, not as supernatural influences, but as the accumulated inheritance of millions of years of human experience, trial, error, and gradual discovery. We are their continuation, their vindication, their hope made manifest in flesh and thought. Their echoes shape our dreams. Their memories live in our genes. Their unfinished songs continue in our own voices as we face the eternal questions of existence, meaning, and survival in a universe that remembers everything but guarantees nothing, that preserves information across cosmic time but offers no promises about which experiments in consciousness will persist and which will join the vast silence of the disappeared.